r/AskReddit, what is the longest 5 minutes you have ever experienced? I used to be a firefighter. My kid is still in there. He wasn't. He was hiding in the bushes next door, a bit frightened, but completely fine. I think that took a few years off my life. The time between a guy who was acting weird and kept approaching me while I was mowing my lawn, who then hid and was watching me from my neighbor's lawn, to when the cops arrested him. I went inside to call them via my back door. Front was locked, and he followed me and started knocking and scratching against it. I went from hiding on the ground against my back door so he couldn't see me to locked in my upstairs bathroom with a bat. By the end of it all, 5 minutes seems like forever when you're terrified. Wife had a seizure during labor. They couldn't find the baby's heartbeat afterwards and rushed to emergency C-section. Everything stabilized, but it was scary. Seemed to go on forever. 4 years later everyone is happy and healthy. Geez, you reminded me of our experience. Wife was getting epidural placed, but MD put the needle in too far, and it became a spinal. When he pushed the meds, I saw my wife's color drain out of her face and her head rolled to the left. She was in a semi-sitting position in the bed. He took a BP and it was 60 systolic. Having been an EMT, I knew her heart was responding to try to make up the BP, and sure enough, next BP just a minute or so later was 160/100. She vomited across the room. I'm certain the finger dents are still in the cushion of the bench I was sitting on. I'm a paramedic. When the patient isn't doing so hot, I can tell you 5 minutes on the way to the hospital lasts a long ass time. Fellow medic, I sometimes do long distance, 3.5 hour transports, and man, I've had some long moments in the box. Watching sex scenes with parents. I'm an adult now and it still makes me uncomfortable. I'm a police dispatch officer, and I had a 6-year-old girl call in on the emergency number, and the first thing she said was, "There are men here, and they are hurting daddy." The time it took for the first unit to arrive at the scene was the longest minutes in my life. We were lucky we had units nearby. Oh man, this brings back a ducked up memory. I once lived in a not so great part of town near my college. It was the night before my last set of finals sophomore year, and I had just finished studying my ass off for 2 days straight, and was getting ready for what I thought would be a solid night of sleep. I wake up to a man yelling, and a woman crying hysterically. I look out my window, I was on the 3rd floor, and see this man standing in the middle of the street, weirdly lit by the street light, and a sobbing woman runs after him, and tries to grab him. He proceeds to backhand her, she falls down, and he yells at her. She gets up, and I think what I saw was him punch her repeatedly. Except suddenly there is blood freaking everywhere, and she is screaming, like I've never heard before. My hands went numb when I tried to call 911, and as I get an operator on the line, this woman is trying to drag herself away, while this guy is kicking her, and has a freaking steak knife in his hands. Luckily the cops and paramedics showed up quickly, but the first words out of this guy's mouth are him yelling AWW. I didn't mean it, it was an accident. Then, as he's getting tackled, he yells at his kids, who I realize at this point witnessed the whole thing. Which of y'all little witches called the cops? You know I didn't mean it. They couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. Not sure if it was 5 minutes, but felt like a literal eternity. Being on the receiving end of a sexual encounter when I was 5 years old. It's true what they say, with enough pain the brain just shuts off. Hard to explain what that was like. I wasn't so much in and out of consciousness as I was in and out of being aware of what was happening. Was kinda like when you're asleep, but wake up only to fall asleep over and over again. So things seem dreamlike and unreal. Then you wake up a bit more, and the reality of the situation hits you, but then you just go back to sleep and it repeats. I think it lasted at least 5 minutes, but might have been longer, or maybe shorter. I honestly can't say. I was on placement with a doctor, and he told a patient that he might lose his leg due to diabetes. It obviously upset him, but the doctor left to go get something, leaving me in the room with him. He must have been gone for only 2 minutes, but I swear it felt like 20. The guy was quietly sobbing to himself, and I had no idea what to do or say. 6 months ago, anesthesia ended too soon. While the surgeon was still stitching up my knee, after realigning my patella, there were still 3 stitches to go. I still can't decide what was the worst pain, the tourniquet on the top of my thigh or the stitches. Probably the last 5 minutes of my dad's life. They'd done all they could for him and all that was left was to make him comfortable. We were all with him and sat around as he faded away. He was only 63 too. That was last August, but it feels like it was yesterday. My son was silent when he was born. The doctor gave me a serious look, handed me the scissors to cut the umbilical cord, and then rushed my son to a table on the other side of the room. I moved to the head of the bed to tell my wife what a great job she did. I honestly have no idea how long it took to hear him cry, but those seconds/minutes were the longest year of my life. He turned 20 last month. I did a bungee jump off the Verzaska Dam in Ticino, Switzerland. Link. It's famous for being in the opening scene of GoldenEye. The jump itself was amazing, but as I bounced up and down after the initial jump, my body rotated, and the bungee cord kind of corkscrewed around my legs a couple of times. When the vertical motion finally stopped, I was hanging over a huge drop with a rocky riverbed below, and the cord wrapped right around my legs, giving the impression that it was all that was holding me up. The operators were shouting at me to remove my ankle from the twisted cord so that they could pull me back up. My rational mind knew that I was securely fastened at the hip, but the tension of the cord on my ankle made it feel like I depended on it, and that I would fall to my death the second I unwrapped it. I was physically unable to unwrap my ankle for a full 5 minutes, while the guys shouted down from the top of the dam. Upside down, blood rushing to my head the whole time. Eventually I found the courage to unwrap my ankle, and everything was fine. But man, that was the longest, most horrible 5 minutes, upside down and being asked to go against every instinct of survival. Every time my dad begins a story I've heard 100 times. They sent me out of the room so my wife could have the epidural. Then they came and got me. Nope, that wasn't it. It was a couple of minutes later when they decided that my son's cord was wrapping around his neck in utero, and that the only way to save my wife and child was an emergency C-section. And then the 7 standing people in the room wheeled my wife on the bed out, leaving me alone with beeping unhooked monitors in a room that was 3 times larger, empty than full. Everything went fine. Kid and wife are perfectly okay, but damn. When I was a kid, my mom told me to wait online at the supermarket, and then she went to go get some more things. The person who was at the cashier had just paid, and the lady in front of me began unloading her not heavily packed shopping cart. She had almost finished loading and was about ready to pay when my mother finally reappeared. Those were simultaneously the longest and the shortest and most terrifying 5 minutes of my life. My dad did this to me when I was about 7 or 8. The cashier ended up scanning everything before my dad came back, and I just remember bursting into tears when she told me the total price. Being a kid and waiting for my mom to finish talking to friends. That ain't 5 minutes though. That's legit an hour. Very short backstory. I was born with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis and have been largely bedridden and wheelchair bound for the past 6 or so years. Now it's called GIA. Replace rheumatoid with idiopathic, but I'm not sure which branch I belong to. Regardless, because of my disease, my hip replaced when I was 19. Story. Back in November, I was diagnosed with TTP and was in the process of dying. I was in and out of consciousness and quickly nearing the state of permanent brain damage, unable to speak properly, knowing what words I wanted to say, and only being able to get out bathroom and birthday, plus general confusion. Meanwhile, the doctors in the ICU were hooking tubes to my femoral artery while wholly unable to understand what I was trying to say. Because I had only ever had one problem with my hip in the past, and I had no idea what was going on, other than that I said yes to surgery. Oh, yeah, I could nod or shake my head, but could only say no. I often forget that. Because the birthday and bathroom thing was so traumatizing, I was sure it was related. Which meant something was wrong with my hip replacement. I was then convinced that was the problem, and that I would need weeks to heal. Not that I had during my actual replacement, now that I think of it. Weird. Anyway, when I was going in and out of consciousness, I thought each time I woke up was a new morning. Weeks and weeks were going by, and I was slowly healing every day, until one morning I woke up and started to panic. I was feeling better, the pain was gone, so I must have been healed. But if weeks, it possibly even months had gone by, then where was my fiancé? Where was my son? When the panic had fully set in, I was convinced everyone thought I had died, and my fiancé was distraught and killed himself, because it was the only way he would ever not come visit me for so long, and my son was sent to live with his abusive alcoholic of a sperm donor. Absolutely freaking out. Have never felt so vulnerable in my life as I did that moment. I tried desperately to ask the nurse about my fiancé. After about a dozen slowly articulated pleas of birthday and bathroom, I decided to try boyfriend instead, only to come out with birth friend. Thankfully that was enough. My nurse went from giving me a kind, yet frustrated nods to a purposeful rigidity, then said, boyfriend? You want fiancé's name? I nodded like a bobblehead on crack. That's when she said the words that are likely the most relieving thing I've heard to date. He was on his way. When he got there, I had to be sedated, because I tried to get out of my bed, to climb him like a tree. I never wanted to let him go. A few days later, and he was still with me, when I was able to start talking again. The first thing I asked my fiancé, when he got there, how long have I been here? To which he replied, one day. When I found out I was stabbed. Boring story about how it happened that I've told 1,000 times, but for some reason I never realized I had a gaping hole in my face and had to be convinced I was badly injured, which I obviously denied because I couldn't feel a thing. First moment that felt like forever is when I put my hand to my chin because it was itchy, pulled it back, and my hand was covered in blood. Still figured it must have been a zip that popped, so I got dragged to a mirror to see my face. Just looking into a mirror and seeing yourself, but damaged is a real ducked up moment. Like, I know it was me, but it was more like I was just on the outside of it all, watching myself slowly come to the realization that I'd pretty much had two mouths due to the damage that was caused. Great plastic surgeon who got me fixed up in no time, but goddamn, is it strange to have someone convince you that you've just been stabbed in the face. I can remember the conversation I had with my friend who had to convince me. She told me there was a hole in my face, and I told her it was my mouth, and that she has one too. Adrenaline is one hell of a drug. LMRO watching my crush walk away after I told her how I felt. Then she came back about 5 minutes later and just quietly told me she didn't want to speak with me anymore. Edit. Thank you for all the F's for respect. I'm humbled. We were at a water park and my two kids and their two friends were in the wave pool. At one point I realized I could see 3 of them, but not my son. We were calling from the side to them asking where he was, while the waves rolled. They couldn't see him either, and we spotted an empty tube floating near them at the same time as the lifeguard hit the emergency stop alarm. I had tunnel vision, and felt like I was blacking out watching the lifeguards haul someone out of the water. The longest minutes of my life, and then I heard him beside me say, "Hey mom, why'd they stop the waves?" He had gotten out before the waves started. It wasn't him they pulled out. Having my house broken into, held at gunpoint, beaten, and my brother was shot. It really felt like they were taking their time, but it probably didn't last very long. Bleeding out and waiting for my now ex-boyfriend to take me to the ER. He took 5 minutes because he was following my blood trail with carpet cleaner. It's kinda funny now that I know I'm going to live, but at the time I wasn't so sure. It was closer to an hour rather than 5 minutes, but definitely felt like a lifetime. When I was in undergrad, I had a sort of friend slash coworker who I lived in the same dorm with. One night he texted me asking if I wanted to come hang out for a bit. This wasn't too unusual, since we saw each other around the dorm a lot and would stop to hang out for a bit when we did, but him actually messaging me to hang was a little new, and I never felt that we were that close as we'd pretty much just talk about work and our roommates when we saw each other. But anyway, I wasn't doing anything when he messaged that night, so I was like, hey, sure, cool, why not? Maybe he and some friends are playing video games or something. When I knock on his door, he opens it wearing a tux, gives me flowers, gets down on one knee and starts professing his love for me and saying how he knows we are destined to be together and all these life plans he has for us. I'm not an oblivious person, but still had no idea he was even remotely into me, so I was really caught off guard. When I finally snapped out of it and tried to speak/tell him I didn't feel the same way and was sorry, he told me to let him finish, so I just sat there for what felt like days, feeling so inherently uncomfortable and embarrassed. When he finally decided he was done, after about an hour of this, I'm not exaggerating, I slowly put the flowers down, told him I was so sorry I didn't feel the same way, and quietly left. That was about 10 years ago now, and to this day I've still never experienced something as long and as uncomfortable as that. Sitting by my daughter's hospital bed. She was a very ill toddler. My husband had to leave for work. He had a multi-million-dollar project he had to attend in another state. She had been in the hospital for days, but the last 5 minutes were critical. Everyone in the room realized how awful the situation was. My husband is, and always will be, our daughter's best bud, but he had to leave. We were in the wait and see phase of a critical illness and had been there for days. She suddenly woke up, sat up, and said, "I want a sandwich." Holy hell. We all burst into laughter, crying, tears of joy. He kissed her, cuddled her, hugged her until she said it hurt, and raced out the door to catch his flight. She turned the corner and was released the next day. Frick. Talk about a roller coaster ride, though. Waiting to see the doctor to find out if I did or did not have breast cancer. Edit. I do not have cancer. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, you internet people.